Future, and the Wize Move Society, the community for the over 50. My name is Tebello Mokhema, and I will be hosting this session, and I'm joining you from Pretoria in South Africa. We believe that the over 50 generation has a significant role to play in the creation of the future. They bring so much knowledge, experience, and wisdom to the table that we can use to create solutions for the new challenges that we are facing. It is our intention in the Wize Move Society to offer an environment to meet like-minded people from all over the world and all walks of life who would like to connect, have fun, and contribute to building a better future. It's also our intention to shift the way of thinking of society about the 50+ generation and the significant role they can and should play in creating the future. We also want to be able to change the mindset of the 50+ generation so that they redefine their purpose, find their passion, and are aware of their potential and their ability to play an active role in creating their own future and the future of the generations to come. And finally, it is in the intention of the Wize Move Society to have a positive social impact on the economy by creating new opportunities, projects, jobs to empower this generation and amplify their voice. With these Tuesday live conversations, we aim to give you a glimpse of what is happening online on the Wize Move Society, to share a bit about both the challenges and the opportunities that the 50+ generation is facing, as well as how the Wize Move community works together to create the solutions and play an active role in society. The 50+ generation is very clear that they are not on their way out. They are able to reflect on what they have learned thus far in their lives and are still part of the future. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, we love to have you contributing to the conversation through our chat box, or at a time when we will be having a question and answer session, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. For those of you that will be joining us here on Facebook, please share your feedback and questions in the comments. We love interacting with you. We love hearing what you think of these sessions. And also later, what is it that you would like to hear us addressing more in these sessions as we continue to have them, for the next few months. I will be joined as well in this session by the founder of Move into the Future and Wize Move Society, Ingun, Bol, who is also the founder of Female Wave of Change. And I'm extremely excited as well to be joined by our key guest speaker for today, Eugene Smit, who is the Chief Insight Catalyst at Insight OD and is a neuroscience expert. We will also be joined in the conversation by Dr. Tatiana Rowson, who is a researcher in this space of people that are moving in the next level of their lives into their 50+ community. We'll also be joined by Mary Jane Roy in these conversations. Before we dive into our topic today, I'd like to give my co-hosts, Tatiana and Mary Jane, a chance to say a few words about who they are and what they do. And lastly, they will be joined by Eugene, who will tell us a little bit more about who he is and why he's considered a neuro expert in the world. Tatiana, over to you.
Thank you, Tebello. Hello, everyone that are listening to us. So I'm a coaching psychologist and a researcher that look into what happens in midlife and beyond. And I can tell you a lot happens. We're all very busy. So that's really, really what we are here to discuss. And I hope you join us on Facebook. Mary Jane, I'll pass you my mic.
Thank you, and I accept it gracefully. Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Jane Roy, here in the Netherlands, although originally from Canada. And yeah, I'm one of the thought leaders for Wize Move Society, and also one of the influencers, trainers, facilitators for the upcoming workshops we'll be hosting. And yeah, this is just such an important topic to me. It was an eye-opening moment when I realized what the neuroscience is and has proven. We can teach old dogs new tricks, you know. We are absolutely all able to develop new neural pathways, new neural connections until the day we die, literally. So it's this that can allow us to change. So I'm passionate about this topic, Eugene. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to share. Yeah, thank you.
Over to you, Eugene.
All right, thanks, Tebello. Good evening, good afternoon, hello, wherever you are around the world. So name is Eugene Smit. My background is I spent most of my adult life in the corporate world as an executive running either the HR area or a sales area. And during that time, one of my biggest problems that I experienced was how to create a sustainable behavioral shift in my colleagues. And we kept on speaking about linking people to the values of the organization, and we kept on failing miserably. So that brought me to a point where I left corporate in 2008 and started focusing on the field of organization development, but in particular executive coaching, and found my way to neuroscience and started finding some of the answers which I'd been seeking to help create those changes. So that's my background. That's who I am. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share this afternoon with you. So I'm going to share my slides. I'm not sure if you can see them on Facebook. Great, Tebello, can you confirm that you can see the slides there?
Yes, we can
Correct.
see that. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, I'm just going to move this away. Sorry, I'm having a challenge here.
New neural connections are being built right at this instant.
There we go. Okay. All right. So, okay. So let's get into the talk, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time just exploring some of the concepts with you, and then we'll go into some extensive conversations, question and answer sessions. So the first thing that I want to talk about is just this notion of unconscious versus conscious thinking, and it's based on work done by various academics and various institutions. Dr. Srini Pillai from Harvard is one of the guys that did a lot of research around this, and we now know that we spend between 90 to 98% on a normalized distribution curve, a normal bell curve, in the unconscious thinking part of our brain. And if we turn that around, that means that we spend somewhere between 2 to 10% in the conscious thinking part of our brain. What does that mean? So I'll explore a little bit around the conscious and the unconscious and what I mean by that. But understanding the bell curve, it means that we spend, some of us as little as 2% of our awake time in our conscious thinking, and some of us as much as 10%, and the majority of us somewhere in the middle. Can we extend that? What does it mean, and what is the impact for us in terms of our lives? There's a beautiful quote that was written by Carl Jung in the mid-1920s, and goes like this. He says, until you make your unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and we will call it fate. So to what extent are you and am I leaving my change, or my ability to change, my ability to focus on this new life that I've entered, and to what extent am I calling that fate by merely operating from an autopilot perspective? So the next little bit that I want to explore as well, that has an impact on how we show up, is this notion of fear versus anxiety. And fear is that response to an immediate threat, whether it's certain or uncertain, real or imagined, but I react to fear in a certain way. And anxiety has a very similar response. And if you look at the brain regions, and I'm not going to bore you with the biological details because I'm oversimplifying it dramatically as well. But if you look at the biological regions that overlap, they overlap so closely that it's almost statistically indistinguishable to determine these responses. But both fear and anxiety trigger a response in us. And what I want to say about anxiety, and particularly when the pandemic hit us first at the beginning of last year, there was a lot higher levels of anxiety, and that seems to be dissipating across the globe at the moment if you look at some of the latest research. But what that anxiety does is it results in higher levels of cortisol and higher levels of noradrenaline, which then directly impacts your thinking neurochemicals, which are dopamine and serotonin, and maybe a little bit of oxytocin. So you need a mixture of these neurochemicals to get to your best thinking, but that long-term anxiety, and if you are anxious about the age that you're at, anxious about the challenges of your life, then those moments of anxiousness will start developing higher levels of noradrenaline and cortisol. And cortisol I liken to giving your brain an acid bath. And that's not a very pleasant thought to have. So we need to find a way to actually mitigate those processes. And just very briefly, I'm just going to separate two of the quick parts of the brain just from an oversimplifying perspective. The prefrontal cortex, which sits around this part of the brain here, is really our active and our conscious thinking part of our brain. It's where we question the reason for our existence, the higher order, higher level type of thinking. It's also where we have our working memory. So when we have new information, we take that new information through our working memory, file it, categorize it, link it to memories and behaviors and habits of the past. So working memory is also quite limited, and it's quite a small structure. I'm not going to go into too much detail. All I want to say about the energy consumption of this prefrontal cortex is it uses approximately 80% of the energy that goes to your brain, and your brain uses approximately 20% of your daily energy, which would include oxygen, blood flow, nutrition, hydration, etc., potentially. So again, from an oversimplified perspective, I want to just talk about the amygdala. And what I want to separate is that the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex are inversely correlated. They cannot operate fully at the same time. So that's not entirely true, because when the prefrontal cortex and the conscious thinking part is on, the amygdala is always lurking in the background, seeking for threat or danger 5 times every single second. So the linkage between that is important, because when the amygdala starts firing and it causes the fight or flight response, which you might have heard of, I like to add freeze, because you have a fight, flight, or freeze response in terms of certain danger. So if you see a snake, for instance, as an example, your fight response might be that you want to stand on its head. The flee response is you want to run away, and the freeze is you just freeze in the spot. And it's, for me, it's important just to understand how that impacts in terms of our lives. And it doesn't have to be that very overt. It can be a very subtle fight, flight, freeze response. And what happens is when you have that response, the amygdala physically draws some of the resources away from the prefrontal cortex, so the blood flow and the oxygen, and actually stunts the conscious thinking bit, so they don't operate nicely together. And what I like to do is I like to draw the amygdala like this, because they really are evil eyes. They're the eyes of the devil. They hold you back in terms of doing your best thinking and your best work. So we need to find a way to ensure that we're able to prevent ourselves from slipping into these defensive behaviors and defensive thinking. And anxiety makes the defensive behaviors and the defensive thinking more habitual. And the more habitual it is, the harder it is to slip out of it. So if you're anxious about the space that you are in at your life, if you're anxious about the health risks in terms of the pandemic floating around, all of those anxiety processes will actually make you operate more in your autopilot thinking and stop you from doing your best work and your best thinking. And you freeze and you can't actually see the wood for the trees and you can't move forward. So the next little bit that I want to link to that is the notion of, can the brain be rewired? Now, Mary Jane already gave that away. Thanks, Mary Jane. And we speak about the brain being neuroplastic, and that neuroplasticity I'll expand on a little bit, but we also understand that neurons that fire together wire together. And that's a theory that was written by Webb many, many years ago. And what we understand is, if you imagine my fingers are neurons, when we develop or focus on a certain activity or behavior, then there's a thin little layer of myelin that wraps around those neurons. And that myelination process becomes stronger the more we focus on it. We refer to this as attention density. That which you focus on for long enough will develop over time. So it brings us to the space of neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is this notion that the brain grows from birth to death. It's a device that never ever stops growing, as long as we also ensure that we keep it healthy and keep it energized and keep focusing on the notion of learning and the notion of developing. So neuroplasticity then is the ability to change our physiology as well as our functionality by stimulating it in some ways. So we need to then also just understand, so what is the process that I would actually use to develop this? And this is a little diagram that I use just to give you a quick understanding of the different thinking constructs, to give you a broader development or broader view in terms of how we should think and how that drives insight. So conscious thinking I put on the above the waterline on this iceberg example. Unconscious thinking I put below the waterline. And unconscious thinking is really the middle part of the brain where we think with our emotions and our behaviors. Again, it's a gross oversimplification, but for the purpose of quick understanding. Subconscious then is our broader thinking methodology where our beliefs and our values sit. Now, here's the dilemma. I want you to imagine a metaphor of an elephant walking in a certain direction. That elephant is represented here by your unconscious and subconscious thinking. If you want to change some of your behaviors, I want you to imagine an ant on the elephant's back walking in the opposite direction. You can see that the ant will have to do lots of walking for a long period of time to start impacting those behavioral changes. So it's not quick and easy, but it can be done. And the more we focus on it, the more it develops over time. Whoops, sorry, I put my timer on. Okay. So the conscious thinking is the 2 to 10% that I spoke about. The unconscious thinking is the 90 to 98%. And if we want to focus on changing anything, we've got to take the unconscious behavior and create conscious awareness with it. So we've got to think about it consciously. Now, how do we do that? We'll expand on that in a minute or so. Once we've created awareness, we then need to set what I refer to as intentional and deliberate actions. So often people talk about SMART goals, and I say SMART goals are great. They specific and measurable and attainable and realistic and time-bound, but they only become real if you set intentionality and inspiration. So they have to be I-SMART goals. And the intentionality for me, if you ask yourself the question, if you set a goal and you go, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely am I to execute on this goal within the time frame that I've selected? And if it's a 9 or a 10, you've got a good chance of delivering it. If it's anything less than that, you're either wasting your time, or then you've got to ask yourself some really deep thinking questions to say, how can I make this a 9 or a 10? How can I make this so important that I have the intentionality to deliver on it? So if I then focus on my intentional and deliberate actions, and I do so every single day for a period of time, and I really mean that, every single day for a period of time, then I start rewiring at the unconscious level and start creating new wiring there. So if I use a simple example of, I want to lose 5 kilograms in the next 3 months, if I don't focus on that every single day, focus on my diet and my thinking around my habits around eating every single day, I'm likely to fail, because we need to create a new eating habit and a new pattern around what is it that I ingest? How do I go about it? What are my snacking habits and how do I deal with that? So it's that everyday notion that starts driving the change. On the top right, I put reflection. And as a society, a global society, we don't spend enough time reflecting. We like daydreaming, and our daydreaming or rumination, we think is thinking, but it's actually just unconscious thinking that runs around. Let me give you another quick metaphor. The daydreaming or the unconscious part of your brain, I like to liken to a horse that runs in any direction at any time. The conscious thinking I like to liken to the rider that can control it. Now, there are biochemical reactions in our brain that push negative thoughts up at us the whole time. We have the choice of saying that negative thought is right, I can accept it and I'm prepared to work with it, or we can reject it and say, that's a lie that I'm telling myself. It's a lie that my unconscious horse is just popping into my brain. And what we don't do is we don't spend time reflecting on that, and we accept that voice as the master that drives us, that unconscious thinking, the fate that we accept. So we have to use conscious and deliberate actions and conscious and deliberate reflection every single day if we're serious about moving forward. And I'll explore that a little bit more just now. But once we start reflecting enough, we then open the pathway to insights. Now, insights in this modern world that we live in, we've heard the term the VUCA world. It's volatile and it's uncertain and it's complex and it's ambiguous. And we're constantly bombarding our brain with more and more information, not giving ourselves enough time to do proper thinking and reflection. If we reflect, and I'll show you a slide in a second, if we reflect, we open the pathway to potential insights. Now, remember I said neurons that fire together, wire together, and insight is a light myelination of a couple of neurons. If we don't focus on it, that myelin layer disintegrates and we lose that aha moment. Now, I challenge people to say that you haven't woken up one day to say, what a great idea, I must do that when I get to the office or whatever. And you get there and you go, what was that great idea I had this morning? I can't remember it. And it's because we haven't fully myelinated that process. We haven't actually grabbed it and said, is that a new insight for me? Is it an aha moment? How will I drive it? What will I do? What are the intentional and deliberate actions that I'll take around that? And as soon as you start doing that, you open the second loop, which if you then take it up to awareness again and create that second loop around it. So reflect, insights, intentional, deliberate actions, focus on them regularly, start creating the rewiring, then for you, nothing changes. Now, what you can use to help you with this process is having a coach, having a mentor, having a colleague or a family member. If you want to change something easy that you can alert somebody else to say, if I go into autopilot with this particular thing, will you give me a symbol? Will you stop me? Will you touch my hand? Will you whatever? Just to remind me that I've slipped back into my autopilot. And if you take that and you regularly practice that, then you'll start making changes. And I say 8 to 12 months question mark. And the jury's out on how long it really takes to change. And if it's a simplistic change, you can rewire it quite quickly. If it's a longer change, it takes longer. So just to quickly demonstrate to you your built-in patterns and habit, if you can just fold your arms. Just everybody fold your arms. And now try and fold them the other way. Can you feel how difficult and uncomfortable that is? That's a built-in little pattern. I mean, you can do the same with your fingers if you just interlace them and then take them apart and try and interlace them the other way. It feels odd and strange and unusual. Now, something like that you could rewire quite quickly because it's quite a simplistic, unconscious behavior, but obviously some deeper behaviors will take a longer time. Right, so we're beginning to get the process of understanding how this fits together. Just quickly a slide of work done by an author called Jung that looked at the notion of insight. And once we reflect, the alpha band wave and there are 4 bands. I'm only focusing on the alpha and gamma. The alpha band wave we see starts climbing on the scope, and the gamma band wave, which is associated with taking action, starts dropping on the scope. And at the point of insight, we see these bands intersecting. So there's strong evidence, strong researched evidence that insights cause a fluctuation in the bands in our brain, and it's at the subconscious level that it starts talking to us. And once we have this aha moment, these two bands swap over, and we all of a sudden are illuminated and excited and want to drive actions immediately. And if you've ever had, if you've ever been coached or been in a coaching situation, you will have had those insights and felt that energy that it provides when you're now wanting to move on. So I do a lot of self-coaching. I spend a lot of time coaching myself, and I went through a coaching session this morning. And the energy that I got when I had a couple of those aha moments, I actually had to force myself to slow down and just stay within my thinking for a bit, because I just wanted to start moving to action. And you've really got to stretch yourself if you are going to action to ensure that you get the best out of your thinking. So what questions or what conversations are you having with yourself? What are the self conversations? And if I look at this model, it's called the TAPS model. It's designed by Dr. David Rock, and it talks about tell, ask, and problem solution. What we tend to do is we spend more time in the telling ourselves about the problem space or telling others about the problem space. And most of the conversations that we have from an unconscious space sits in this bottom little circle. So we touch a little bit maybe on asking about the problem, maybe touch a little bit on asking the solution, or talking about potential solutions. We love giving advice. So we give ourselves advice and we give others advice, and we don't actually create the best thinking when we do that. What I'd like you to start looking at is how can you shift this circle into the asking yourself about solutions. And that's really about the self-coaching notion. And I know Tatiana is a coaching expert, and I'd like to get her view on this just now. But the more you ask people about their own solutions with the utter belief that they have the potential to solve the problem, the more you help them with the quality of their thinking, and the more likely they are to have aha moments and to move forward with it. And for me, that's the image that I want to leave with you. So what should my self-conversation focus on? From an unconscious perspective, we love being stuck in the detail and the drama and the problems. We like that negative talk. It makes us feel comfortable in that space, and we drive the detail and problem and drama. And when we have conversations with others, we love getting into that space. What we need to, however, do is we need to start focusing on what is my vision in terms of this particular problem? What is it that I really want to achieve here? What is the outcome that I want? You can ask yourself a question like, so if you do some self-coaching, and I'm going to give you a quick framework in a minute, but if you do some self-coaching, the question that you ask yourself is, in 6 months' time, I'm celebrating a success around this problem I'm having. What does it look like? What does this future look like? I'm sitting in my favorite place of the world, having a glass of wine or whatever it is that I do, and celebrating this success. What does it look like? What's that vision? And that starts helping the notion of reflection, and then we can get into planning. How will I get there? So thinking about it, but then taking action around it. So these are the two bits. Now, normally when we do enough thinking about vision, that's when we have some aha moments, and then it's quite easy to move into the planning. So let me give you a quick framework, and this is the framework that I use for myself, but the metaphor that I'm using here is, if I imagine my life in book titles, then I've got to clear my mind and say, what are all the titles in my life? And you need to come up with about 25 or 30 different book titles. So you've got to stretch yourself. And when you get stuck, you need to say, if I could have any book in the world, what would it be? And ask yourself those sort of questions. And I've just put a couple here as an example. So my one book title is Growing Income. My other book title is Growing Sales. Is that the same thing? Well, potentially. So I might be able to combine those when I start working. My other book title might be Family, might be Health or Fitness, might be Weight Loss. So You need to spend a lot of time just working through all of the titles in your life, and don't use judgment. Remember, judgment comes from the unconscious part of our thinking. It's that notion of judging ourselves for being fallible, for being whatever. So just stay in your thinking and start documenting that. And once you've done that, you can use a simple methodology of saying, do I want to coach myself on this? Do I want to explore my thinking on this further? And you can use a yes, no, maybe. And you can go through each one and you can mark them with a Y or an N or an M. And once you've done that, you need to go back and say, are the yeses really the ones I want to work on? And you want to refine this to maybe about 8 or so, not more than 8. And then you also need to ask yourself the maybes, are you certain that they are maybes, or do they need to turn into a yes? So you need to think through and spend the time reflecting on these book titles. Once you've done that, you then sit back and say, okay, so I've got 8 or so book titles that I want to work on. And then you go, what is the one book title that'll give me the biggest benefit if I was to change it now? If I had the infinite ability to change it now, what is that book title? And then you take that book title and you identify 3 like that, because working on more than 3 at any one time is going to be difficult. So you identify the top 3 like that, and then you can polish it, you can make it fancy, you can link it to a hobby, you can do whatever really resonates with you. But if you ask yourself now the question of saying, so I want to work on, say, sustainable continuous income of X euros per month. And then that is a goal. That's measurable. But is it exciting? How can you make it exciting? And you can turn it into perhaps a process where you go, having the ability to travel every second year overseas or every year. Whatever that is, that really starts grabbing you, and you can shine it to the point where it really becomes exciting. And at this point, I guarantee you, when you've done thinking, you will be jumping at the bit to get into what actions am I going to take? How will I drive the actions? And it's a beautiful little process that certainly I use a lot when I do some self-coaching with myself, on myself, by myself. Okay, so some of the questions, sorry, there's a voice.
Yes, it was me. Eugene, you've given us so much so far, so
Yes.
hang on to the questions, hang on to the questions. But
Right.
I'm just sitting here and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, there is so much I have to be thinking about. But what I love in terms of what you have said so far, and I'd like to bring, the other speakers in, is
Fantastic.
this issue about, thinking about change consciously and intentionally, right? And it's not just I want to change, but it's really how am I going to do it? What am I, intentions about it, and consciously, being reminded to do that. And I want to then quickly ask Tatiana to say then, if we are going to be thinking, intentionally and consciously, what is it that keeps us stuck in the autopilot space? Because from what I'm hearing is that most of us just keep moving and moving, and we're losing or we're missing out on an opportunity to really be thinking consciously and intentionally about our lives and what we want to achieve. So what is it that keeps us so much stuck in the autopilot space?
Okay, is that question for me, Tebello? Okay. I think that's a fantastic question. Eugene, thank you so much for this presentation. It's amazing amount of knowledge in such a short time. So anyone listening benefited immensely already. Tebello, that's an interesting question. I think one of the aspects of adult development, which is quite clear, we go through life and sometimes the business of our life, the routine, the things that worked out for us before prevent us from stretching ourselves. So life is fluid. So the environments change, the context change, and we need to constantly be challenging our thinking and challenging our connections in our mind, and intentionally and consciously thinking about the things we want. But in the day-to-day, most people find that difficult because it's very easy to, by default, fall back on the usual habits. So to break that is a big challenge. And that's part of what I'm sure Eugene work with clients in the coaching environment, is to break that vicious cycle of falling back to the same behaviors. Even though we might feel uncomfortable, we know that doesn't work anymore, but it's a trap. We come back to that.
Right. And in your research, Tatiana, when you work with people who are in the 50+ generation, are they able to break that pattern? Are they able to get out of it? Obviously with experience or learning or teaching, but how easy is it for them to break out of those patterns?
I would say it's generally hard, and I'm going to say something that's quite sobering. Usually it's through bad experiences, is having a health concern, or by losing someone, or by losing a job. These are the moments that really force people to step back and reflect, and then start engaging with their thinking, with who they are and what they want to do. But we can do that more positively, and we can do that more proactively. It's just we don't learn that in school. We're not taught in school that we should be proactively thinking and planning and imagining a future that's more interesting for us.
Right, right. Thank you very much for that. And Mary Jane, if I can quickly bring you in there, and just ask them the question to say, what would be the biggest impact if we're able to think about change consciously and intentionally?
Yeah, I think something that builds on what both Tatiana and Eugene have mentioned, and I feel that it's simple, it's easy to do as long as we're motivated to do it, is to reflect. It's a self-reflection part. We need to build in those moments, and doing that in a journal with a set of questions such as, the what went well today, why did it go well, what could I have done differently, why would that have helped? Those are the kinds of questions that we can ask ourselves that start to build these self-reflection capability skills in ourselves. And I always say to people, just, buy a beautiful journal, one that you want to hold in your hands, that you really, if it's lying beside you, you think, okay, this is my moment. And maybe even something simple, use your smartphone, set an alarm at 6 o'clock in the evening to say, this is my reflection moment, and give yourself 5 minutes. That's all it could take. And then there was one thing, Eugene, that I wanted to ask you. I may have to leave the call quite quickly, and may not. But when you talked about the axis and the ask and the solutions, you said, let's move more over to that side. Something I shared about in the first session that I did with Ingun and Tebello was that I consider myself a learned optimist. And I think it was because I started to learn to ask in my early 50s questions in that quadrant, solution-based questions, instead of focusing on the problem. And I just want to say that it triggered with me that I thought, this is what I was doing. And as a result, went from a more negative bias into a more optimistic approach to life. So I just wanted to say that connection can really, it was sort of an aha moment when you shared that quadrant. Right. So thank you. Yeah.
Right. So Mary Jane, if I can just add to that, and the key for me is that we don't think about our thinking. We think about problems. Right. And reflection, we've got to think about our thinking. And if you are keen on exploring that, you can Google coaching thinking questions, and you will find lots of material available with lots of questions that you would never ask yourself or somebody else, because we don't know how to ask ourselves thinking questions. we refer to this concept as metacognition. So you've got to think about your thinking and explore your thinking, which helps you to move to the next space. And that's what you're talking about, Mary Jane, is in that space of metacognition.
Thinking about our thinking. Phew, I feel like I'm back in class here. And I wish my teachers could have, been able to teach me that. Ingun, you started the Wize Move Society. You are bringing these wonderful conversations and the speakers, that we have today, just like we're having Dr. Tatiana, Mary Jane, and Eugene that have joined us. And having listened to what has been said so far, how do you foresee the Wize Move Society helping its members and the targeted audience to be able to think about the thinking?
Yeah, I love that. Think about the thinking. Well, thank you so far, Eugene and all the others joining here. It's when I hear this conversation, Wize Move Society was very much about acting, because I did see and I did hear so much about the problem that I really felt that we had to work on the solution and that we had to act. So I think there is already something that the whole setting of the Wize Move Society is based on solutions, is based on acting, is based on breaking those habits and really proactively doing that. But you have to do this together, because going through a transformation like that is almost impossible to do that on your own. So doing that on a platform or in a community like the Wize Move Society, where you are challenged, and where you are giving the opportunity to do this together, there's the whole atmosphere, is the whole setting is about thinking. And right now, with a group of some of the thought leaders who are also here, we are thinking about we are developing the corporate program. And then you see this is a transformation that is going to take a year for employees to join us and go through this transformation, with a coach, with training, and with going through all kinds of processes to, in the end, be able to have that growth mindset, to have that solution mindset, to have that entrepreneurial mindset, that is based on growth. But I'm very much aware that in this whole setting and in this whole process that we're going through, we need to think about our thinking and reflect on our thinking, because those are the steps that will, in the end, bring them the situation that they're looking for, or maybe even not yet know that they're looking for, but obviously bring them in a totally different situation, totally different crossroads in their life, and that they can make choices and really can take the next step.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what I'm hearing is that the Wize Move Society becomes that community that Eugene was referring to, that if you're going to be making the changes, you need to have coaches and mentors and colleagues. And in this case, other members that are in the Wize Move Society that you can be able, to go through this thinking process together with. And I want to bring Dr. Tatiana back into the conversation in terms of then asking this question from your experience. What are some of the habits that 50+ people would need to change for a better brain health? Are there 2 or 3 key habits that we see when you work with them, we can really help them to be able to build a better brain health?
Well, I'm going to pinch some of the ideas from Eugene because he's here, and why not? I'll start with, take a positive outlook in life. There's a lot of research to show that people live better, longer, and more fulfilling lives when they have a positive outlook in life. If you see things with a positive perspective, you are able to approach the challenges more proactively rather than reactively. So that's a big plus. I could say do Sudoku and crosswords and things like that, but actually there's very little gain from doing these things. It's being proven, if you enjoy doing them, by all means do it, but that's not going to improve your brain health. What's going to improve is challenging your brain and learn a language, learn to speak German, I don't know, learn to speak Portuguese or Arabic, or I don't know, all these challenges on your brain change. Eugene, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Change your neuropaths and sort of force you to think differently. Language is a great example because language is so grounded in the cognition. So when you learn a different language, you have to rewire your cognition. Is part of that. And socialize. We are social animals. There's a lot of health, a lot to gain from getting together with people and engaging with them. So I think these are my 3 top ones. And I pinched some of yours, Eugene, but I'll let you come in.
No problem.
If I could add one to that list as well, would be sleep.
Yes.
Quality and quantity of sleep. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's that could be a whole session on its own, everyone. But
yes,
really and truly, that's the basis, I think, of a healthy brain. All right, and we're not getting enough, and we're not getting the quality of sleep that we need. So
yeah. Thanks, Mary Jane. The 3 for me, there are 3 aspects, and Tatiana touched on the one. Mary Jane touched on.
If I can just interrupt, I'm going to say goodbye.
Okay.
I'm going to have to get into a call, but thank you, everybody. And
Nice meeting you all.
I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
So, can I add something, Eugene, or
okay, I just want to quickly wrap up, Nicolette, and then I'll hand over
no
to
problem.
you. So for me, there are 3 aspects to brain health as you age. The first one is sleep, and it's ensuring that you get between 7 to 9 hours a night. I'm not going to go into the whole biology of it. The second one is exercise, and you need to get your lung heart rate up for 20 minutes a day. Now, for some of you, that might be walking up and down a flight of stairs. For others, it might be running a marathon. But you need to get your heart-lung rate up. You need oxygen and blood flow to get your best thinking. And then Tatiana touched on the most important one, and that is learning and a growth mindset. The more you actively challenge yourself with learning, the more likely you are to grow and to continue to keep your brain fresh. So that's it.
Great. Nicolette, please come in. I'm loving
I was actually going to say the exercise as well, but I think it's also an open mindset that you dare to challenge yourself. I think it's also a bit of attitude. You see what I mean?
Right. Oh, wow. I think this, Ingun, we have to bring this topic back again. This is the most active I've seen our participants. Judy, welcome. Judy is joining us from North America. Welcome. Go ahead.
I am Ontario, Canada. So, and everything that's been talked about in the short time I've been here, I teach my clients. And I think the most important thing is our health. If we don't have our health, we have nothing. Can't learn a new language without our health. And what's happening to our health is that we have consumed so much poisons, toxins, chemicals from the air, from the water, from the food, from fabrics we wear, that it gets settled in the brain. I mean, they've proven Alzheimer's is from toxicity and other diseases. So if we don't have a healthy brain, we can't learn a new language as hard as we want to and hard as we try. And so one of the main things I like to do with my clients is teach them about gently detoxing the body with food. And if you've heard of the medical medium, Anthony, have you heard of Patty knows the medical medium. He's been working for 30 years plus with patients and doctors, and he's not a doctor himself. He says he's led by the spirit of compassion, and he works with ordinary food. And he's found this detox smoothie, which is like spirulina and things like that, right? And dulse and wild blueberries that actually detox the body from all the chemicals over time. And so it's such a simple solution, but the testimonies are everything, right? If we don't have a testimony, it's like we're not going to bother with anything. So the testimonies have been there for years. And I think number one is our sleep and our habits. But if we're full of toxins and can't cope and can't think properly, cognitively we're impaired, let's start detoxing the body so we can then feel better to be able to go out and be more optimistic about life, be more positive, because we're clearing our body of those things that are holding us back. So I just wanted to add that in as an important element too.
Great. No, thank you. Thank you very much, Judy. And I think with what Corona has done and, kept people at home, it's actually helped from where I sit. It's helped people to really rethink and reflect on a number of things. What am I eating? What am I putting in my body? How much time am I spending sleeping? How much exercise am I doing? It was interesting that we had to rewire our brains in that the fact that you are under lockdown. Lockdown doesn't necessarily mean that you can't move in the space where you are living. And a lot of us started realizing that, hey, our homes can actually be some very good gyms or places where we can exercise. Eugene, as we get to the end of the session, I want to bring you back in. There was a question that I saw here where somebody said they would like to hear more about self-coaching and how to build that practice. And it's one of the questions that I wanted us to touch on. In your experience and knowledge in this space, what would be the key benefits of self-coaching or getting coaching to help you, to think about your thinking?
Great. Thanks, Tebello, for the question. So if you, often what happens as a result of the busyness that we have, and as a result of the negative talk and all of those sort of aspects that drive our unconscious thinking, we get stuck. And if we're stuck, it's very difficult to become unstuck and to move forward unless we force ourselves to think about our thinking, unless we force ourselves into a coaching type of process. So for me, the notion of self-coaching is regularly asking myself tough thinking questions. And it's got to be a habit that you start developing. Now, I've already told you that developing new habits takes some time. So there was a suggestion earlier that you set your smartphone by Mary Jane every day. And for me, that's part of the starting process is to set a time every day at the same time for the same amount of time, where you sit down and say, what did I do today? How did I behave? How did I show up? What is it that I want to change? How would I prefer to have shown up? How would I prefer to have worked through this process? And what will I do differently tomorrow? It's that sort of process that starts it. And then if you ask yourself some really difficult questions, and as I suggested, go and Google coaching thinking questions. There's lists and lists that you'll find, and just work through some of those questions yourself. Ask yourself that question, and don't ask it and then glibly from an autopilot, from the horse and rider metaphor, jump into something. Get the rider to control it and spend some time reflecting on it. Get the juices flowing. And I mean, if I was sitting in front of you, I'd be looking for cues in your face to see if I've hit the right question to get you reflecting. When people reflect, you can start seeing it. Often what they do is they look away from you and they look often upwards to the left. And it's a sign that they've gone internal. They've gone into their own thinking. And we refer to it as the faces of insight. So the reflective face is that face of going, the problem face obviously is one that precedes it. So when you get into reflection, if you're really reflecting, you'll feel yourself going inside. You'll feel yourself going into a different level. And reflection is not conscious or unconscious thinking. It's going deeper. It's going deeper into that space. And you start exploring and finding those ahas. And they often happen when you least expect it. And then, of course, once you've done that, the very next question is, was that an insight for me? And if it was, what will I do with this insight? How will I take it forward? What are the actions? How will I make it intentional and deliberate and start working with it? And once you've started working with it, write, document, because that starts getting the juices flowing deeper. So Tebello, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. No, it does. One quick question. So you're saying, right, the newer generation says record or use the phone, which is better?
So for me, when I look at some of the research, the best memory recollection still is when you use an old-fashioned pen, paper, and fingers. So you, and research, and there's been several topics of research around this across the various generations, and recollection is better when you've written. So for me, when you are thinking, you need to be sitting with a pen and paper. When you're reflecting, you've got a journal and a pen, and you're asking yourself the tough questions. And if you're really diligent, you write the tough questions down that you're going to ask yourself and think through, and then have space to journal under that. And that starts getting the juices flowing.
Wow, awesome. Thank you for that. Can you believe we are 4 minutes to the end of the session? This is amazing. Thank you so much for such wonderful reflection and insights that you've provided to us. One of the phrases that I loved from last week, and I love to see the thread that is being created when we had Mahriet, who was talking to us about finding joy, she referred to saying, what we fire will wire together. And what I'm hearing again today is that as you think about your thinking and you start rewiring and creating different patterns in your brain, they start wiring together, you know, to be able to help you to gain that better life where you are, you know, are more conscious and are more intentional. Ingun, any final words from your side? There are some insights that I've picked up that I'd like to share, but before I do that, let's hear from you.
Well, I was just writing down. I do have a lot of insights, you know, a lot of aha moments. And again, you know, there's this brain is already working on, okay, so how can we implement this even better in what we're doing at the Wize Move Society? And we'll be, you know, coming out more and more of all the things that we will bring there. So no, it was again amazing, and so thank you very much, Tebello. It's up to you to summarize.
Okay, so let me see if I can quickly do that as we get to the end. Thank you everybody for your participation, even the quiet ones. I believe that there were, you know, thoughts and ideas that were shared in there that you'd be able, you know, to take and run with going forward. So these were for me some of the key takeaways from our session today. Firstly, be aware of your conscious and your unconscious thinking. And for you to be able to become aware of that, you need to really spend time thinking about your thinking and understanding what's happening. Understand the blockages that are brought by fear and anxiety, and how then do you start working on processes to overcome that. Picking up a positive outlook in life. And I think with COVID, you know, and all the challenges that we've had, this is becoming even more profound, that in this life that we have, there are still so many positive outlooks in our lives. It doesn't matter whether you are 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, 90. Always look at picking a positive outlook in that life. Understanding that the concept of neuroplasticity and rewiring is a concept that each and every one of us are able to do until the day we take our last breath. So whatever it is that we have learned doesn't necessarily have to stay with us all the time. There are new things that we can be able to learn because our brains are neuroplastic, have neuroplasticity within them. Focusing on self-coaching, and how you can be able to do that is in terms of being able to write down your thinking, the experiences, or the questions that you have, and be able to reflect on them. And finally, by doing that, you are able to then to unblock your thinking so that you can be able to create new patterns, you know, in your brain that will lead you to the life that you want to live in the end. And with those words and this wonderful, powerful conversation that we had, I once again want to welcome you and ask you, join the Wize Move Society, become a member, you know, by going onto our website, www.wizemove.co.za. wisemove.online. You will find all the information about the Wize Move Society, the benefits of joining the Wize Move. If you haven't heard them today, come and read about them on the website, you know, in terms of what are the benefits of joining us. And for those that are still, you know, keen and are saying, I love this, I want to be part of this, there's more that I want to learn, and there's more that I want to offer and share with the members that are there. If you join us in the month of July, your subscription will gain you an additional 2 months, you know, that you will be able to become part of the members. And once you have become a member, we have regular sessions on Mondays, on Tuesdays, and on Fridays. And we're excited because we've been working very hard. As of August, we are starting on our various training, workshops, masterclasses that will be taking place. So come join this movement and be able to gain benefit out of this. Everybody, wherever you are, where you have joined us, whether it's through Facebook Live or whether it's through Zoom, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. And we hope that there is a lot that you've learned out of today. If there's nothing else that you've taken out of today, go back and think about thinking. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day, good evening, and a good night wherever you are in the world. Thank you. And we'll see you next week, Tuesday. We'll see you next week, Tuesday, same time, same place.